Stereotyping in organizations. Presenters Alicia, Tamara, Zihan, Lulu, and Ashley. So, what are stereotypes? Walter Lippmann defined stereotypes as distorted picture or images in a person's mind, not based on personal experience, but derived culturally. The stereotype is a widely accepted generalization of people that share the same background or the same visible characteristics. They are based on patterns of behavior, specific attitudes, religion, gender, or physical and cognitive abilities that we recognize in groups of people and individuals that belongs to that group. A group of people is never homogeneous, even if they share very identifiable and visible characteristics. Stereotypes are deeply rooted in our society, and as we adopt them over time, often unknowingly, they provide foundation for our own biases. Stereotyping is usually incorrect characterizations of people, which often leads to a mistreatment and discrimination. Stereotyping in the workplace is based on assumption that individuals or a group of people will behave in the same way just because they share the same characteristics. Stereotypes affect our personal attitudes and form biases that we display at workplace. Stereotyping is often done subconsciously or at times innocently or in jest, but the result may have more severe consequences. There is a risk of making a poor business decision due to stereotyping or possibly developing a hostile work environment in which people can feel being targeted or treated unfairly. Understanding stereotypes would ultimately develop sensitivity and awareness of the type of stereotypes within the organizations and would lead to positive changes, healthier work relations, and business environment. The purpose of this presentation is to define what stereotypes are, highlight different types of stereotypes, and show how they affect people in workplace. We will also provide recommendations on how to manage and reduce stereotyping behavior. We will discuss attribution theory proposed by psychologist Fritz Heider on how individuals perceive the information they receive and interpret events as well as how these form causal judgments. We will also touch on the concept of self-fulfillment prophecy studied by Robert Merton on how our false set of subconscious expectations or beliefs predetermine and how new behavior unfolds in reality.
Why do people stereotype? First, people engage in stereotyping because it is a form of categorical thinking. Stereotyping can be unconscious and an energy-saving process that simplifies our understanding of the world. It is easier to remember features of a stereotype than the constellation of characteristics unique to each person we meet. As humans, we have an innate need to understand and anticipate how others will behave. When we do not have much information about people initially, or when we seldom interact with them, we rely on stereotypes to fill in the missing pieces. Stereotyping is motivated by the observer's own need for social identity and self-enhancement. People define themselves by the groups to which they belong or have an emotional attachment to. People are also motivated to maintain a positive self-concept. The need for social identity and self-enhancement leads to the process of categorization, homogenization, and differentiation, all of which are the foundation of stereotyping. Categorization is a social identity is a comparative process, and comparisons begin by categorizing people into groups. For example, by viewing someone as a Canadian, you remove the person's individuality and instead see them as a prototypical representative of the group called Canadians. This allows to distinguish Canadian people from people who live in the US. Homogenization is the process of believing that people within a group are very similar to one another simply because they belong to that group. For example, people think that Canadians have similar attitudes and characteristics, but Canadians collectively have their own set of characteristics. Differentiation is the process of assigning more favorable characteristics to people in our social identity group than to people in other groups. For example, us versus them or good guy versus bad guy attitude. Problems with stereotyping. Stereotypes do not accurately describe every member of a social group. Stereotypes may fit the description of a few members, but it is not characteristic of all people in the profession. Stereotypes also lay the foundations for discriminatory behavior. Decision makers may rely on stereotypes to establish notion of the ideal person in specific roles. People may hold negative attitudes toward people belonging to stereotyped groups. For example, hiring managers may prefer hiring a male despite meeting a female candidate that is equally or even more highly skilled based on their unconscious stereotypical bias towards women in engineering and technology. Stereotypes also have a negative impact on task performance and individual work investment. Stereotypes are more likely to influence performance on complex and challenging tasks. People who are personally invested in work tasks would be most influenced by stereotypes.
The attribution theory is a perceptual process that involves forming beliefs about the causes of behaviors or events. It is an important theory to understand in organizational behavior because it allows us to decipher whether or not certain situations that arise in the workplace are due to internal or personal characteristics or due to environment or situational influences. Take an example of an employee who is late for a meeting. If that person is someone who consistently shows up on time, the likely assumption would be that it was probably because of traffic, family, or an emergency. That is an external attribution. But if the person is always late for meetings, then automatically we assume that it was because the person is forgetful or lacks motivation. That is an internal attribution. The attribution process is susceptible to two main types of attribution errors, that is self-serving bias and the fundamental attribution error. Self-fulfilling prophecy is another perceptual process in which our expectations about another person cause that person to act more consistently with those expectations. It is an important theory in organizational behavior because it helps us understand how the supervisor's expectations about an employee can inevitably influence behavior and performance. Hiring supervisors and managers who are positive and optimistic towards their staff can increase the incidence of positive self-fulfilling prophecies and create more motivated, confident employees, subsequently improving organizational success and individual well-being. This slide is an illustration of the self-fulfilling prophecy cycle. It shows how high expectancy employees gain more skills and knowledge because of better training and opportunities provided by supervisors compared to low expectancy employees.
Another theory that closely resembles the self-fulfilling prophecy is the stereotype threat. This theory states that members of a group can become so concerned about the negative stereotype assigned to their group, they end up displaying the stereotype threat they are trying to avoid. For example, there is a widely known stereotype that women are not as capable at mathematics than men. In fact, researchers have found that when women believe gender differences do not impact mathematic performance, they outperform women who believe that gender differences do impact mathematic performance on standardized tests. In conclusion, researchers have stated that stereotypes have the ability to change individuals' behavior to be consistent with that stereotype. There are various stereotypes within workplaces, but we will be discussing gender, racial, and age stereotypes. Gender stereotypes are overgeneralizations of characteristics, differences, and attributes of a certain group based on their gender. Gender stereotypes can lead to the development of negative self-concepts and influence career decisions and even missing out on opportunities for career growth. Due to the gender stereotype of women in STEM fields, women are less likely to choose STEM careers. They fill half of all the jobs in the US economy, but they hold less than 25% of STEM jobs, and only about 26% of women with STEM degrees work in STEM jobs compared to about 40% of men. Racial stereotypes are constructed beliefs that all members of the same race share similar characteristics. These attributed characteristics are usually negative, and racial stereotypes in organizations have the ability to impact individuals' job performance and job satisfaction. Age stereotypes are defined as often distorted and inaccurate perceptions of the worker's characteristics and traits on the basis of age. Older workers are seen to be less resistant to change, less flexible, and less willing to participate in training and career development programs. They are also viewed as less healthy and closer to retirement than their younger counterparts, making them less valuable to the organization than younger employees. So why is it important for organizations such as supervisors and executives to understand stereotyping within organizations? It is important because today organizations are experiencing unprecedented change in diversity and inclusiveness in the workplace. For example, in 2021, more than 22% of Canadians belong to a visible minority group, up from 13% in 2001 and just 5% in 1981. Therefore, to be a successful Canadian organization today, it is important that companies create diverse and inclusive workplaces. There are many advantages to an inclusive workplace, including that it enables people to feel psychologically safe, engaged, valued, listened to, and respected. Overall, inclusive workplaces produce better decisions, attitudes, team performance, and several other favorable outcomes for employees and the organization. However, having more diverse organizations increases the chance of stereotype biases within the organization. Therefore, it is important to be aware of stereotyping biases and how they impact our interactions with our coworkers, as they are a major contributor to a lack of workplace diversity.
Reducing stereotyping in the workplace. It is widely recognized that creating a diverse and inclusive environment increases workplace culture and productivity. However, our unconscious biases, including stereotype bias, severely challenge our ability to create these conditions. We cannot bypass our unconscious biases completely, but we should try to minimize them. Step one is to increase awareness. Becoming aware that there is a problem is kind of the first step in fighting any problem that we have. Companies can fight this by providing diversity awareness training, administering formal tests that'll help their employees recognize where they have unconscious biases or where they potentially are stereotyping. And you can even utilize informal tests by having employees ask themselves, questions like, who are my favorite people to work with? Who are my least favorite people? Or why? Do I give people, the benefit of doubt or the ability to prove my unconscious biases wrong? Step two is cross collaboration. We tend to like people that are like ourselves or that are familiar to us or that we've had positive experiences with in the past. So when companies encourage cross collaborations where different groups get to, mix, you increase the chances that your individual employees are having more positive experiences with people they wouldn't normally mix with, which just helps kind of remove some of that unconscious bias. And then the third step is setting reminders for the company. Ultimately, being self-aware is an ongoing process, and you want to prevent employees from slipping back into old, comfortable patterns.
This brings us to the end of the presentation. To summarize the key takeaways, stereotyping negatively affects people in the workplace by laying the foundation for stereotype threat, as well as systemic and intentional discrimination. Whether it is caused by gender, racial, age, and other forms of stereotypes, dealing with stereotype threat diverts the individual's energy and attention and makes it more difficult to perform tasks well. It weakens the employee's self-efficacy and confidence and contributes to negative self-concepts and career decisions. Unintentional systemic discrimination affects the hiring process, employment opportunities, salaries, and professional development. And worse, intentional discrimination deliberately puts the target individual at an unfair disadvantage. The key to minimizing stereotyping behaviors in the workplace is through encouraging and training employees in areas such as improving self awareness of perceptual biases and improving meaningful interactions. It is important to create diverse and inclusive workplaces, but our unconscious stereotyping biases can severely impact our ability to create these conditions. Therefore, becoming aware of the existence of perceptual biases is the first step to minimizing them. Awareness makes people more mindful of their thoughts, actions, decisions, and behavior. Thank you. That is the end of the presentation. References follow.